We also Thank you. We also have HLA Board Chair Mick Constantino and HLA Vice Chair Aaron Swift on the line with us. So we are joined by all of our chairs. I don't know, Mick and Aaron, if you would like to say hello before we get started as well. No, that's okay. You don't have to. You'll have opportunities.
I'll just say good morning to everybody. How's that?
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you very much. Well, all of that being said, everybody, thank you so much for joining us again. Thank you very much. I know it's a busy Monday after the holiday. Please go ahead and put your name and your organization in the chat, and we'll dive right into today. We are going to do a little bit of a data update. You'll have an opportunity to ask some questions about some data. Then we're going to do a legal update. Then there's going to be an opportunity. I'm going to ask our law enforcement partners and our municipal partners to provide an update, if you are able, on what your agency or what your municipality is doing or might do in response to this law, what you have seen going on, provide an update in that respect. Then we're going to have an opportunity to discuss um, opportunities and concerns from partners, from the community, and to do a little bit more action planning. So I will go ahead and I will turn it over to Imani Smith, leader of our HMIS team, to provide a little bit of a data update.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Victoria. Good morning, everyone. Happy Monday. As y'all can probably tell, I'm super jazzed up on coffee. Thank you again for joining us today. We're super excited to have all of you. I am the manager of HMIS and System Administration with the HLA, and I oversee our wonderful HMIS database. Today, I'll just be talking a little bit about where we are currently as far as our shelter availability and our shelter capacity. This information is pulled from our database. So our end users, as we call them, and our agency providers are entering in all of these and checking in clients here and there, checking their data quality to make sure that this information is always up to date as well. Of course, while we review this information, if you all have any questions about, shelter capacity, availability, things like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to HMIS. I'm also joined by my counterpart, Tony Salgado, on the call. Tony, if you don't mind, would you mind dropping our emails in the chat just in case anyone has any questions moving forward? Next slide, please. Thank you. So this presentation, again, is just going to cover shelter breakdowns, and we're going to talk about our specialized programs. Next slide. In your agenda packet, we did try to include some definitions and terms. We understand that in HMIS land and HUD land that some of these terms may not be, as familiar, right? Or you may call them by other things. So this is really just to help guide you along throughout the presentation today. Next slide. So very important, the information or the data that we are reviewing today is from a specific point in time. When we're talking about availability of shelter beds, we're looking at shelter availability from November 26th, so last week. When it comes to our DV shelters or our victim service providers, that information is coming from November 15th as our DV shelters were out of the office for the holidays last week. Next slide. All right, so let's jump right in. So first, we're going to start talking about our emergency shelter, safe haven, and transitional housing availability, specifically for individuals. So we do have it broken up here. These are broken up again into ES, SH, right, and TH. So looking over at the available beds, as y'all can see, we do have a bit of availability still, or as I should say, room left in our shelters, right? They're not all of them are at full capacity. Um, And so while we're thinking about this and thinking of, different strategies to support our homeless neighbors and clients, looking at available beds is a great opportunity to see, how we are coordinating, bingo word, right? For these different programs, figuring out, if there is a data entry, lag or issue there. So that's why we really wanted to show this information at a glance. So just very quickly, oh, my bad. Would you mind going back, Victoria? Thank you so much. So just really quickly, as far as totals, if we look at that bottom bolded row there, as far as available beds for emergency shelter, right now we're at 244. A large number of those are coming from our Safe Harbor emergency shelter. When it comes to Safe Haven, we're doing pretty well there as far as capacity with Bully's Safe Haven project there. And then for transitional housing, we are at 4 available beds for those, again, specific individual programs. Next slide. Thank you. So individual shelter occupancy. So this is taking information from that previous slide, right, as far as beds occupied and bed capacity, but now we're more focused on utilization. So how are we utilizing, right, our shelter beds? And very similar, right, you're going to see that there is still availability, right? Some of these programs are not at 100% capacity. So again, it's kind of, up to us and our providers to figure out, what our intake process is like, if there's any gaps or disconnects there that maybe we could tap on, different things like that. So as far as emergency shelter, we're at, and these are again all of our specifically individual shelter projects. So as of now, we're at 73% utilization for emergency shelter, 96% utilization for safe haven, and 88% for transitional housing. Next slide. All right, so now we're going to segue into our ESTH projects for families. So a little different here as far as the table is concerned. When we're thinking about families, we don't really look at the beds, right? Because or families come in all different kind of makeups, right? Families, or I should say even households, right? Sometimes you have a family of four, sometimes you have a family of 10. So when we're looking at our emergency shelter and transitional housing projects for families, we organize it by units, right? So the units and rooms that are occupied. And the reason for that, again, is because families come in all different makeups and sizes. So as far as the units and rooms occupied and versus what's available, we have that information listed here. And ooh, I see a question. Go ahead.
So this is Judith with St. Vincent de Paul Cares, and it's not so much a question,
Mhm,
but the ARPA grant actually winds down at the end of this month.
mhm,
So I feel like that capacity is not
mm.
real because the grant's ending.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Weinstein. At
Okay.
end of month. And I believe HMIS did have that notated. So I know that won't be included in our shelter reports going forward, but I definitely appreciate that add on for this presentation. So yes, y'all, ARPA is ending, and that will be removed from our shelter report in the near future. Great. Any other questions at all? Oh,
Monty,
yes.
Teresa Jones had a question in the chat. How are we doing
Yes.
with adherence to the housing first philosophy with shelters and transitional housing providers?
Oh, that's a great question. I will say that would probably be more of a programmatic question, right, for our providers to figure out how they are using the housing first philosophy to do their intakes, to do outreach. So it wouldn't be so much of an HMIS question. That would be very specific to providers and their either workflow process or intake process. Great question, Teresa. So I
Are
may
you
I
looking
may
for
leave that
feedback?
open. Yeah, I may leave that open to providers who are feeling frisky to answer that
Yeah,
question
I
if
mean, I'll
possible.
just say we, at St. Vincent de Paul Cares, it's 100% our philosophy. We are definitely use it in every aspect of what we do.
There is also a question from Arrow Woodard.
Hello. This spreadsheet's been very helpful. I was wondering if maybe this group would like to consider maybe another tab on the sheet that just is how people can access the different shelters. So our street outreach teams throughout the county, like if their go-to beds are usually full or something like that, they can be like, oh, this one I contacted VA at this point, or like, how do I get into family resources? And there's so many like specialty ones here, if they fit that criteria, maybe how like one is for like pregnant teenagers and stuff. You can't send anyone there or everyone there, but I think that'd be really helpful just in the same place. Here's the availability and here's how I connect somebody to that.
Yeah, Errol, that's a great point. So I know that we are currently working or collaborating with WellSky on a shelter report that agencies will be able to pull from business objects if they have an HMIS license. For street outreach specifically, again, we are working on that, again, collaborating with WellSky and working on that mobile app. We did receive the link finally for the mobile app from WellSky. But of course, there are still a couple of things that need to be done on the back end to make sure the information is up to date and relevant. But that is kind of our goal is for street outreach to be able to use that mobile app to see, what eligibility requirements are for certain projects and programs, to see, the time that they're doing intakes, different things like that will be available through that mobile app specifically for street outreach. Any other questions? Oh, Teresa.
Thank you. This question is probably directed to Judith Warren related to the ARPA funding ending, as she mentioned earlier. And I see that there are four families that are occupying or currently in the ARPA funded scattered site housing. And we mentioned that there's additional capacity for 11 more families. So the question is, the families that are currently in the ARPA funded scattered site housing, are they being transitioned somewhere else when the funding
They
ends?
are. Yeah.
And are you, since it's mentioning a capacity for additional families, have y'all stopped doing intake for additional families?
We have stopped doing intake and they will be transferred to another funding source so we can serve them completely.
Thank you.
Nice. And then I think Kathleen has her hand up. Oh, no. Oh, Kathleen, you're muted if you are
I do.
Okay.
Sorry. On this phone, this is kind of to piggyback off of Teresa's comments, and I think it's and a little bit of arrows. So on this, I find this slide helpful. But if we look at the ARPA funding that's ending, is it at the end of December? So not only are we, we're losing 11 that are available plus the 4 that are already occupied. So 15 will be removed from our total of 23 at the bottom, correct? And so I just wanted to make sure, number one, that the 4 families are going to remain housed in some way. And then the other thing was, and I think this is more to Arrow's point, is on the far left column, all of our emergency shelters, some of them probably need a little asterisk about who can go there. Because if I'm looking at, if I'm picturing myself as a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times and they say, oh, well, there's 23 family units available throughout the county for families who are on this waiting list, or we find, at a local park. That's not necessarily true. First of all, it's not going to be 23, but some of them have restrictions, correct? And I think that's got to be communicated on here, that it's not a flat number for everyone necessarily. Is that correct? I mean, you can help clarify for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. That's a great question. So this this presentation is separated. We did try to separate it into those different, I should say categories, right? Versus like family projects, individual projects. We also will further in the presentation get to our what we call specialty projects and our veteran projects. Specialty projects are things that can be, some were mentioning, the project for, pregnant or expecting women, right? So that will be on our specialty slide, which we'll get to a little further down in the presentation. But I definitely hear the feedback. So it may behoove us to at least put a little bit more information about the requirements for these projects. Um, but we did try to separate it into those buckets already.
Thank
So
you.
we'll definitely go ahead. Yeah, of
Thank you very
course. We'll
much.
definitely go ahead and
But
try
I
to
do want to
get to
respond
there.
once again that the 4 families will be served. They're not going to be, they're going to stay stable through other funding
That's
sources.
great news. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Judith. Next slide, please. Awesome. So, same as before, right? Now we're talking about family shelter utilization as well. And again, right, this is specific to our family emergency shelters and transitional housing projects. So as y'all can see, right, we're at about 75% utilization for ES and 80% utilization for transitional housing. Oh, and very important as well, please note that these counts do not include our victim service providers or DV projects. Next slide.
So I know that this has already been sort of noted, but again, that 27% utilization is not real because that grant's winding down.
Thank you. All right, so next we have emergency shelter, safe haven, and transitional housing availability specific to our veteran projects. Okay, so as y'all can see, we have a couple of veteran projects here. I believe there was a previous task force meeting where St. Vincent's low demand project was brought into question about its project type, whether it was or was not a safe haven. After much review, checking in with the VA and checking in with the VA data manual, we confirmed that it is in fact a safe haven project. So just wanted to put that out there because I believe that was brought up during a previous task force meeting. So with our projects listed here, there's still a little bit of availability, right? Specifically in that VA low demand project, going down to our transitional housing projects. I do also see some availability in our HEP GPD project, right? And also our bridge housing. Oh, I see a question from Teresa. Go ahead.
Thank you, Imani. My question is specifically related to HEP.
Mhm.
I noticed on the previous slide that if memory serves me correctly, having just seen the slide,
Mhm.
that they were at about 67%. I believe that's correct. And here I'm seeing capacity that's available of about 10 units. And so it raises in my head again the question I raised earlier about housing first. I'm wondering if that's impacting why they're not I mean, y'all, and I assume this is correct, y'all still have a list of families that are trying to access shelter. And I'm wondering why the utilization, particularly for families, isn't higher. I mean, isn't at 100%? If we got a waiting list of people waiting to get in shelter, I'm wondering what's creating that disconnect. And,
Yeah.
and I noticed it particularly for HEP. So maybe this is a question for Satina.
And it looks like we also have our senior coordinated entry manager as well with her hand raised, and that definitely sounds like coordinated entry as well. So I can pass it off to Cezanne and then maybe Satina if she's available.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I'm available. The our emergency shelter beds we go through coordinated entry only. So those referrals come in through Cezanne. There aren't 10 units available. Maybe there's 10 beds. I think each unit is 3 people per bed or something, or four. One of them is a 4 bedroom, and then I think there's 2 3 bedrooms. So I think that's why it's saying 10.
Thank you, Satina. Hello,
And that's
everyone.
for like
Yes.
individuals. Sorry. Go ahead.
My name is Suzanne Boylan. I'm with the Homeless Leadership Alliance. My role at the Homeless Leadership Alliance is the Senior Manager of Coordinated Entry. So to answer your question, Teresa, and just to kind of piggyback off of what Satina was saying, all family shelter referrals do come through BHLA through Coordinated Entry. I am the one that submits and refers those families by using our prioritization list for the family shelter prioritization list that we have. There are pending families that are being referred over to 7 units. Those were just requested during like the Thanksgiving kind of holiday. So those 7 families are being referred over today. And per, the workflow and the CE policies and procedures, after the referrals are submitted, HEP and the intake coordinator would go ahead and start reaching out to those families to complete a pre-intake or intake assessment. And then, of course, work on the enrollment should they be able to, speak with that particular families. So those 7 families that are pending referrals currently for HEP's family emergency shelter. So the utilization will most likely go back to 0. Hopefully tomorrow, should everyone that should all those families that I refer answer and, decide to want to go into HEP's family emergency shelter. I hope that answers your question.
Just a follow up a question I would say, and maybe things have changed since I retired from the city, but I recall that HAP had some requirements for entry related to uh, um, drug testing and things of that nature. Is that changed, or, and that's why I keep going back to housing first. Is that still a practice at HEP, or has things changed? Satina. Hello?
I'm not sure if Satina, I'm more than happy to answer that for Satina, but I would
I'm
like to give
sorry.
her.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I was on the other line. I'm sorry.
So, Satina, this is Teresa again. My question was related to what had been the practice at HEP related to drug testing and things of that nature. Have those practices changed?
They aren't a barrier to housing. UA tests are done during the intake by the nursing. It's part of the nursing assessment, but it doesn't prohibit your intake. We still practice housing first.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nice, great questions. Thank you, everyone. Next slide, please. All right, so veteran shelter utilization percentage by beds. Again, just to move quickly, because I know that we're over, so I apologize. So for emergency shelter, we're at 95%, safe haven, 87% utilization, transitional housing, 67% utilization. Next slide, please. And just to reaffirm again that this data can change, right? It may have already changed. This again is from a specific point in time. The shelter information and the shelter report is updated on a weekly basis, usually on Fridays. So definitely want y'all to keep that in mind. So this information, right? This is our victim service providers or DV shelter information. This information is from November 15th. Again, our DV providers were out of the office last week. So this information again will be updated this Friday. So as far as CASA's emergency shelter, 12 beds available. Hope Villages has 15. Transitional housing, they are at full capacity. Next slide. Thank you. So again, looking at utilization, again, right, transitional housing is at 108%. That overutilization, again, that can be from things like cribs or cots. If they, have a family of, five, they may, try to get creative as far as fitting them all into a room or a unit. So definitely want y'all to keep that in mind. Next slide. All right, y'all. So we're now at specialty programs. So this is our emergency shelter and transitional housing availability. So right in our emergency shelter, that's going to include agencies like Care, right, that does medical respite work, that does include pretty much all of our medical respite programs, also substance abuse programs as well in that top section. For transitional housing, we do again have it broken up where, where we're saying the special requirements may be for pregnant women or individual men only, women only, or again, substance abuse. Next slide. So then as far as our specialty shelter program occupancy and utilization, for emergency shelter, we're at 63%, and for transitional housing, we are at 82%. Next slide. All right, so just to quickly wrap up again, y'all, this is just at a glance data from a point in time. This information will be updated this Friday. We're hoping that the shelter report that we're collaborating with WellSky will be done very, very soon. And we'll also be able to provide some updates about our mobile app very soon as well and provide that to street outreach. If y'all again have any questions or if you notice something that needs to be updated, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Tony Salgado, our data analyst. We'll be happy to support you in any way. Thank you guys. And that's it for me, Victoria. Thank you.
Thank you. Megan, you can skip forward to the next slide to show the HMIS contact info, just to make sure everybody gets that. And then Tony and Amani, can you put that in the chat as well, just to make sure everybody gets that again? And then next up, we have Senior Manager of Coordinated Entry, Suzanne Boylan.
Good morning again. I know I introduced myself just a moment ago, but just to introduce myself again, my name is Suzanne Boylan. I'm with the Homeless Leadership Alliance, and I'm the Senior Manager of Coordinated Entry. So I oversee, manage, and handle the CoC's coordinated entry system. This includes the shelter prioritization list, which is a list being managed for those families with minor children that are seeking shelter. At this current time, family shelters are being referred over, to shelter by coordinated entry. Individual shelters are not being referred by coordinated entry. So I just wanted to kind of put that into perspective when you see some of these numbers, or when you kind of reflect on those numbers that you are seeing regarding utilization for shelters. We can go ahead to the next slide. So I wanted to start off with highlighting, to put into perspective, how many of those that are actively enrolled in coordinated entry are also dually enrolled or working with or have engaged with street outreach. So currently, the active families on the coordinated entry prioritization list, out of the total amount of active families on the coordinated entry prioritization list, 4 of those families are both enrolled in coordinated entry and also co-enrolled with a street outreach program. And then for individuals, the active individuals that are awaiting referral or, awaiting to be self-resolved in housing or being housed in general. There are 17 individuals that are enrolled in coordinated entry and duly co-enrolled with a street outreach program. So I wanted to kind of have this slide be first, so we can really have a better understanding as to how many of those that are actively unsheltered, which is going to be the next upcoming slides, how many of those unsheltered families and individuals that are on the coordinated entry active prioritization lists are not engaging with street outreach or have not, been enrolled with street outreach within our continuum of care. We can go on to the next slide. All right, thank you. All right, so I also just wanted to quickly provide a very brief overview of what the CE prioritization list is. So the coordinated entry prioritization list is used to manage prioritization or housing assistance, and it's maintained through HMIS. So the prioritization list is managed by myself, the senior manager of coordinated entry. So what I do every single Monday is I generate the updated prioritization list from HMIS, which is separated by individuals, families with minor children, and veterans. So following the generation of weekly prioritization lists, I review the list for proper enrollment, of course, in both shelter and our rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing projects to ensure that the data is, up to date, it's accurate, and there are no issues. Of course, providers are responsible for maintaining that accurate and confidential case records, like via HMIS. So the prioritization list, it's set up to reflect those unreferred individuals and families are placed on the list in order of the highest coordinated entry assessment scores. The current coordinated entry assessment that our CoC is utilizing is the VI SPDAT for individuals and then the VIF SPDAT for families with minor children. And the prioritization list and those that are being prioritized on the active list, awaiting to be referred or working on self-resolving towards housing, it is also determined by our distinguished tiebreakers. So the prioritization list allows us to kind of, it creates that order for myself to make referrals to the appropriate housing providers, such as rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. Currently, coordinated entry is only referring to rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, and then, of course, family shelters. So with that being said, coordinated entry at this current time is not referring to transitional housing and is not referring to individual emergency shelters either. All right, so I'll start talking about that left box that we're seeing on the screen right there. So this information that is shown right now on the slide, all of this information, all of this data is kind of coming from the last prioritization list that I ran, which was on November 25th. So that was last Monday. I did, of course, pull the coordinated entry prioritization list today, but they're actively being cleaned up. And since our meeting fell today, it's best that I provide that data that is already cleaned up from last week's, so from last Monday. So qualification for either rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing is based on, like I mentioned, the CE assessment. But it's not, there are like distinct eligibility criteria, of course, for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing projects. So the family numbers listed in that left box that we're seeing on the screen right now. I apologize that the last sentence on that box should not be there. But that does include veterans. So currently there are 70 families on the coordinated entry active list, active tab on the prioritization list, whom are awaiting either referral to rapid rehousing or working on being self-resolved. 10 families on the coordinated entry active lists are awaiting referral and have scored within that permanent supportive housing scoring threshold. So the individuals on the coordinated entry active list, there are 572 individuals on the coordinated entry active list awaiting to be referred or working on self-resolving. And then there are 202 individuals on the coordinated entry active list who are either, awaiting referral to permanent supportive housing, which is that recommended scoring threshold that they have fallen under. All right. So to the box to the right on the slide, the charts, this chart also represents a number of veterans. So what I did was I took the full numbers and the full counts from that left box, right? And I wanted to kind of distinguish and show out of those, what's the veteran, the veteran counts looking like. So as of November 25th, there are 3 veteran families active on the coordinated entry prioritization list, awaiting referral or enrollment to rapid rehousing. And there is 1 family awaiting referral enrollment to permanent supportive housing. Veteran individuals that are on the coordinated entry active list, there are 107 veterans that are on the active list, either waiting to be referred or enrolled to SSVF, rapid rehousing. But this number, I just wanted to really, really make sure that I highlight this information that I'm going to share. A lot of these most veteran individuals, the 107 veteran individuals that are on the veteran active list, some of those are already kind of working with a newer program called GPT Case Management. And we've been leveraging that program for those that are for those that are not eligible, either over income for rapid rehousing. Or unable to, be enrolled in rapid rehousing through SSVF. So that is something that we, in our community are leveraging. So not every one of those 107 individuals that are scoring within that rapid rehousing CE assessment, threshold that's scoring. They're not truly maybe waiting to be referred or enrolled to SSVF because a lot of these are already enrolled in GPT case management. But they are reflected on the coordinated entry active list because GPT case management, it's not a rapid rehousing program or project. So 26 veteran individuals are awaiting referral or enrollment to permanent supportive housing. We can go on to the next slide.
We do have some questions in the chat, Suzanne. Russell just asks if 11 of over 700 coordinated entry individuals are active with outreach.
Yes, that's correct based off of based off the data, right? So that is what that's what I saw when I ran and I filtered out to see who is duly co-enrolled with street outreach and also coordinated entry. This doesn't mean that there are a lot more, right? Like street outreach enrollments, right? But they may not be enrolled in coordinated entry. I hope that answers your question, Ross.
Chair Beckman asked for clarification. 84 homeless families are waiting for housing. Where are they now?
So Kathleen, I am going to highlight in my next slide, I believe, how many of those are unsheltered. So I did want to make sure that I highlighted those families and also individuals that are unsheltered because there is not all 84 families are, unsheltered, right? Some may be in interim shelter through Directions for Living. So not everyone that's on the active family prioritization list are unsheltered. But I'll be able to provide those counts in the next upcoming slides. That's okay.
And then Arrow does have her hand up as well.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure. So for the individuals that are dually enrolled, that means they have not been put in a shelter yet. They're still street homeless, correct? And that they are on the coordinated entry because the BI's for that is done. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so those are literal street homeless, not in shelter, are the 700.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. All right. So on this slide that we're looking at right now, so this is where I'm highlighting the current coordinated entry prioritization list, the unsheltered data. So those unsheltered households or those families on the active list, 47 of those families that are on the active list are considered to be unsheltered. Some are in interim, temporary scattered site like motel paid by DFL, but that is that is a temporary kind of shelter placement. It's not a true shelter placement because it's not a true shelter program. So some of those are awaiting to be transitioned into a true shelter program and are actively on the shelter prioritization list, awaiting referral to a family shelter program. For the individuals, 258 of those individuals on the active list appear to be unsheltered. So the current family shelter prioritization list as of November 25th, there were 55 families with minor children on the shelter prioritization list, self-reporting to be literally homeless and awaiting interim housing or AKA shelter placement. So 38% of the families on the shelter prioritization list report that their last permanent residence was, city of St. Petersburg. And then on that bottom chart, that bar chart right there, that highlights, how many of those that were on the shelter prioritization list on November 25th reported their last permanent address to be in these specific municipalities. So I want to make sure that I highlighted on that too, on that end. Kathleen, I hope that this answers your question regarding the unsheltered counts. But if there was an additional follow-up question, please let me know.
Thank you. It's all good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. And I believe that is all for my slides, but I will open, I'll open up questions for anyone that may have any additional questions on the data that I've just, shared with you all.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate that. And Megan, if you could go to the next slide, that'll give everybody Suzanne's contact information as well. There you go. There's Suzanne's email, just in case you need. Thank you so much for that data update, Imani and Suzanne. All right. Next on our list, we have a little bit of a law review. HLA Vice Chair and local attorney Aaron Swift is going to give us a little bit of an update, and there will be an opportunity to ask a few questions as well. So, Mr. Swift, if you would like to take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Victoria. So I think I've introduced myself several times to most of you all at these meetings in the past, but I'll do so again. I can wear many hats during this presentation, so I will do so and tell you which hat I'm wearing. So the first hat I will wear is one of lived experience. So I have a unique opportunity of having a lived experience of been homeless in Pinellas County from the ages of 2 and 6. And so I have a unique perspective of being a homeless, unhoused individual from the ages of 2 and 6, 30 plus years ago, having then left the state, been in similar circumstances in Pennsylvania, and then vowed to come back, kind of get back into this community and then serve the community to be in a position that I'm in now, which is to give back to those that helped me. And so here I am. And then From there, I've then served on boards of providers, including Alpha House, and then ultimately the HLA. Okay, so now let me take that hat off and I'll put on the hat of being service on those boards. So I can talk from the perspective of an advocate about this law. And that's going to, of course, come from a certain lens. And that's going to be skewed towards protection of the unhoused, of course, right? So if I take off that hat, then I can put on my lawyer hat, right? And so I can talk about certain interpretations of certain law, words in this law. Like, for example, this law prohibits sleeping or camping overnight. So one thing that we just experienced is a time change because of daylight savings time. And I don't know about you all, but I find it deeply jarring now when it's like 7 o'clock and I want to go to bed because it's so dark out. Well, if someone is laying down and it's 7 p.m. now when it's dark out, is that the same thing if they're doing that in June and it's bright daytime? Well, one of the principles of law is that you're supposed to enforce the law equally. So that's one thing. If I'm wearing my law hat and my lawyer hat, that's an interesting and ambiguous question, perhaps, is the interpretation of the word overnight in this law. So again, if I'm wearing certain different hats, I can talk about this law from a legal update in different ways. But let me just talk about it from a broad perspective of where we are and what this law does and what it doesn't do. So this law is very clever. It does certain things and it does not do certain things. So first of all, it does not in any way, shape, or form, in and of itself, criminalize homelessness. I would challenge any of you to read this bill frontwards, backwards, sideways, and look where it says it's unlawful for an individual to do any of these things, to sleep overnight, to camp overnight. Instead, what it does, it prohibits municipalities and counties and others from allowing it to happen. That's very clever. And these laws were drafted by certain think tanks and other players. I'm not going to get into certain politics behind that, but that's very clever in doing so. So it again, it doesn't target directly individuals or groups of individuals for camping or sleeping. Instead, it targets the counties, the municipalities. And then it goes one step further. It allows individuals or businesses to then sue the counties and the municipalities and other entities if those entities then do allow for those, actions. Now, we are at what we kind of in the law consider a purgatory timing. So the law, in one sense, took effect October 1st. And that's when the public sleeping and the public camping, that's when those sections of the law took effect. And I'll be interested, as Victoria asked, if any of the law enforcement individuals will be giving some information about how they've been enforcing that. And I know we've heard at past task force meetings that, again, as I told you, if you read this law very carefully, it doesn't anywhere specifically criminalize homelessness or the sleeping. It's, again, how it addresses it is the counties, the municipalities. But there are other ways. It's loitering. It's trespassing. There are other ways you can enforce these things. But in terms of how it's going to be enforced, we're in this period of time when the sleeping, the public camping is outlawed, but the private right of action, that doesn't take effect until January 1, 2025. So we have no idea. I can tell you as a plaintiff's lawyer, now my specialty is different. It's financial, it's public, it's identity theft, credit reporting, but we do some accident work. We kind of plugged into the plaintiff's bar. I'm not hearing that there's like this groundswell of this like exciting new area of law that everyone's like waiting at the court House steps to file all these actions under this new law. Now, I can't say it's not going to happen, but it's not allowed to happen until January 1. So again, we're in this weird period of time that October 1st is when part of this law took effect. And I'll be interested to hear from law enforcement if it has been enforced in a way since then and how. I know at one point we were told, or it has been said, that it was only going to be enforced of groups of 6 or higher. But we don't know yet, at least again, if the private right of action where individuals, businesses can sue counties, municipalities for not enforcing the anti-camping provisions, the anti-sleeping provisions. The other thing that the law does allow too, the third major part, is the designation of public areas. Now, I know Pinellas County hasn't so designated any areas unless I've missed some big thing. And I don't think any other county in Florida has yet, again, unless I've missed something. And so I think as far as Pinellas County and other counties are, we're in this kind of pregnant pause of what's going to happen. Where are we in terms of what's happening with law enforcement in terms of the enforcement of this law? Is it going to be enforced aggressively enough that we have to respond with designation of these areas? Or, one of the things that the law does talk about very early on is capacity, that the first thing that has to be met is there is no capacity left with beds. And we just went through a whole presentation that that's not necessarily the case yet in Pinellas County in some ways. But even putting that aside, are we at the stage yet in this county where the enforcement of this law is going to hurt our constituents, those that we are meant to care for, that we have to designate this property? Do we have to respond in a certain way? And that's what this task force is about, of course, right? And then beyond that, what are we doing to lobby to change this law to make it better, of course? And come January 1, there's obviously other, those on this task force who, if you start to get sued, what are you going to do? What resources are going to be used towards that? And then how do we respond? So we're at a very interesting intersection timing wise from a legal standpoint. So I'm curious. I'm happy to answer questions. I'll be very interested, like 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, when after we hit the January 1 private right of action deadline, to see if and when those lawsuits may start. And again, I'm curious now that we've post October 1st, after that deadline has now come and passed, to see what has happened. Now that that deadline is passed as a task force, it's upon us and our duty to kind of respond as what has changed. So again, thank you for this opportunity. If I'm get questions, I'll try to answer, and I'll tell you what happened and where when I answer it. And thank you. Victoria, I can't hear you for some reason, but you don't look like you're muted.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah, I can.
First, Arrow Woodard from the city of Largo had her hand raised, and then Teresa Jones had a question in the chat.
I'm on PIT deployment committee, and so we were actually it was on the street outreach. That's what it was. It was on our street outreach operating procedure meeting the other day, discussing hotspots. And what it was really sounding like from the street outreach teams is they're not in public places congregating anymore. They're in shopping centers and things like that. So in essence, it's pushing folks into the private property areas, which is probably not what the law intended, but it's also not covered as part of that anti-camping law, right? Because it's only on public property. So I thought that was kind of an interesting impact we're seeing.
So, Era, thank you for that comment. And that's a really interesting point of view. I have heard personally a lot of responses from faith leaders and been involved with some personal responses and connecting faith-based leaders, not just in Pinellas County, but also Hillsborough County, that have been offering space on their private properties. Because you're right, this law is specifically addressing public property and it exempts private property. So I'm curious, and that issue, Arrow, could become really challenging if those private spaces make it an issue. And you may remember there was a very, very large New York Times piece, I think it was last year or the year before, about how Walmart was causing several hundreds of millions of dollars of public funding because they were calling the cops on um, petty theft and a lot of unhoused who were loitering. And I don't know if that's going to be an issue if people, if the unhoused start, congregating in those types of areas. But if it's not, and it starts shifting from public spaces to those areas, that's interesting. But I know if it's welcome, like faith, places, churches, that's great. And I'd like to see that shift. And I do know there's some organizing in that area going on right now. So that may even have been an intended effect of the law specifically. And Victoria, you said there was a question in the chat or two?
Yes. First, Ms. Teresa Jones asked, have you taken into account that nonprofit organizations like Advocates for the Homeless might actually sue government agencies under this law?
So, Teresa, that's a great question. I think many people have taken that into account and they are going to sue and they have sued. And I just unfortunately do not think they will win. So, one of the legal review standpoints that I presented on, and it was being watched, was a Supreme Court case, Grants v. Johnson passed, that lost in the last term. And one of the issues in that case was what were the public, bounds of due process and cruel and unusual punishment when you have basically the limits of what was offered publicly to unhoused individuals, and when there were no other options, no other beds available, and someone was sleeping outside, and could you fine them? Could you jail them? And unfortunately from my point of view, and a lot of people's point of view, the Supreme Court said that that was not a cruel and unusual punishment. And so because of that case, laws like this will 100% be found to be constitutional. And so the fear among advocates like myself and others is that there will be laws that are going to be passed that are even stronger in favor of enforcement like this law. And I'm going to put on my advocate hat here and speak out of real fear that if any of you have heard of what's called the Project 2025 and its views on homelessness, I would recommend that you go read about it because it has a very, very, very aggressive and scary stance on homelessness. And there are laws like this anti-camping law, but much crueler versions that are likely to be tried to be passed and may pass, so that we should all be on the lookout for, because this law is a tamer version of them. So I'm going to take that hat off. So yes, but we have thought about nonprofits have sued, including that Supreme Court case. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Michael had asked, have any suits against towns been filed yet? And no, that's what I meant about us being in this purgatory. The law specifically says that suits cannot be filed until January 1st of 2025. So we have 28, 29 more days until they can be.
There was also a question, Aaron. Are there people, organizations working on behalf of the homeless planning to sue in January, and would the CoC sue?
If the CoC would sue, this wouldn't be the right time for that to be announced. So I think that would come to a CoC board meeting if you want to have that discussion. I do think there are people who have thought about whether it would be an appropriate use of this law for nonprofits to sue. and not just think of it as a plaintiff's or a business or a private individual's tool. It's a creative thought. That's how I'll answer that question.
Thank you, Aaron. And then Ms. Teresa Jones added, in my humble opinion, Florida has served as the breeding ground for policies outlined in Project 2025. I hope America is ready for what is about to happen across the country. Thank you all very much for those comments and questions. Does anybody else have a question for Mr. Aaron Swift while he is on the line with us?
Yeah, this is Joe Pandolfino with Catholic Charities, Pinellas Hope. I don't know if it's a question that can be answered because it seems like there's more questions than answers right now. But I run a shelter here at Pinellas Hope. We're not at capacity right now, but we very well could be. After the hurricane, we're recovering pretty good. But when I think forward, is that this is a temporary shelter. This is not a permanent shelter. So we have discharges all the time. And the success rate, though I like to say it's pretty good, we don't house everybody here. So when people are a behavior problem or they've been here so long and there's no movement at all, we do discharge people. Will I be just throwing them out to the wolves at
Right.
that time? I'm sorry you've been here for 8 months, but we're a temporary shelter and you haven't made any progress. So good luck.
Yeah. And Joe, you hit so many points on why this law is set up to fail, because it has no guardrails for any of what you just suggested. It specifically says you have to set up protections to police the use of drugs and alcohol, while at the same time giving no guidance for any other supportive services or protections. So you're right. I mean, what are you going to do? Well, you want to protect all your other constituents. So yeah. I don't know how to answer that question without other questions. You're exactly right.
Yeah, I
So
wasn't expecting an answer. I was just
well, I think you're right though. When you ask a question that is answered by a question, I think us as a task force has to think of this as, we could look at this as a way to go back to the legislature and say, okay, let's look at this and how do we change this bill to say, okay, you want to talk about designated spaces. How do we learn from the existing spaces we have that are successful? And think of it that way, right? It's not this space that you're talking about. So let's talk to Joe and what looks like a discharge in an unsuccessful way, because you're right. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think, yeah, I like the question because we can learn from it, hopefully, and then go to people that we need to talk to. So I think that's the purpose of the task force in a good way. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Swift?
Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aaron. All right. So next on our agenda, we have an opportunity for partner updates. Megan, if you'd please go to the next slide. I think the next slide does ask a few. Yep, there we go. Perfect. This will be an opportunity for some of our partners to provide some updates. And so I'm going to ask, if any of our law enforcement providers on the call could come off mute and provide an update as to what they have seen and what they have heard from their law enforcement counterparts and their agencies.
Am I the only one on here from law enforcement?
I haven't gone through the whole list, but if you want to get us started off, Lieutenant Hayes, I'm sure we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm going through now. So as far as what the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office is doing, at the last planning session that we had with when Daisy was still there, and with the sheriff and the chiefs of police, the majority of chiefs of police and Daisy, and some reps from the city of Clearwater, City of St. Pete, is that we discussed how things are going to progress once the cold weather starts to hit and our community starts to see that influx of people from up north that come down here to this area um, to be homeless, or during the winter months. So what we're going to do is we're going to put together another couple of counts and report back. The other thing that came up in response to this, the other reason that we're probably going to take a look at counting is because somebody at the last HLA meeting had brought up at the last HLA board meeting, had brought up, are there people sleeping on the street in public places that are now going to be in jeopardy of consequences of House Bill 1365, but because they were displaced because of the storms. We started to look at that, and our street outreach team started to go through stuff and started to kind of closely analyze the conversations that we were having and the phone calls that we were getting, and we are not seeing that on the surface. That's for sure. I don't think that population is the population that we're going to be sleeping in public. However, I'm not sure, but we are going to start to do a couple more counts and try to see what the current status of the county is again. I don't have any numbers yet, but we're putting that together now. Um, like Aaron was saying at the beginning, the enforcement piece doesn't take effect until January. So, as far as law enforcement taking any enforcement action right now, we're still in that education period. We're still just educating the population that is either choosing to be on the street and in public places, or not take advantage of the services that are available to them. So we're trying to educate them to let them know that come January, the response is unfortunately going to be a little bit different given the new law. I know at one of the previous meetings, there was discussion on a possible revision to the law. Has that come up at all? Has anybody heard anything on that? Because I checked the legislature's website and I didn't see anything that looked like it was in there. Does anybody hear anything about that?
We there's some hot potato going on as to who wants to be the one to
Bring it up.
sponsor it. Yes.
Okay. Understood.
Yeah.
I was taking notes. Has there been any enforcement? No. Yeah. I mean, I can only speak for the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office and Pinellas Safe Harbor and what we're doing and how we're doing it. So that's kind of what we're doing. Our street outreach is out there trying to engage that population. As far as, Teresa asked at the beginning of this, the housing first approach, we don't have a housing first approach. We have a low barrier approach because we're not a housing organization, and Kevin Marone has educated all of us on the housing first philosophies. And I want to make sure I don't, go down the wrong road. So we are as low barrier as possible. We're still doing everything that we can to help those that, just can't get in anywhere else because of their past behavior or whatever. So nothing's changed on our end. We're doing everything we can, and we're trying to get a better angle on how many people are out there currently sleeping public at nighttime right now.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Haish. Though I don't see any other sheriff or
Just have a real
police.
quick question.
Go ahead.
Follow up to Lieutenant H. When you say get some following number counts and report back, will that be to us at the next task force meeting? Or to HLA?
It'll go back through my chain of command and then get brought up at that if that committee decides to meet, and then I can bring it out once it's gone up through mine.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lieutenant Haish. And I don't see any other police or sheriff's officers on the line. I do see the public defender's office on the line. If there are any updates or additions that we would like to add from that organization.
Start my video. Good morning, all. Nothing too much from here. I mean, kind of like what Lieutenant Hayes said. It's and someone else mentioned it too about the public or the private businesses like shopping centers housing people. There's not a day that goes by we don't see somebody come through here on a trespass. Now, whether that's someone just standing out there or going back to a Walmart shopping center that they're not allowed to, or if it is sleeping and where the owners don't want them sleeping. We haven't really dug deep into those numbers on the a lot of times if it's an ordinance, we're not really appointed to those people, but that data is available, and I'm sure when if the sheriff's office or when municipalities takes a look at it, they can provide what type of if it's an arrest associated with like the last minute response, or the last chance response to trying to get somebody to shelter. So, but we haven't really seen anything where the glaringly where someone has been offered, like the arrest for the trespass is due to them just not wanting to shelter yet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moran. I really appreciate you providing that update. Lieutenant Hayes, you have your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Moran said something that made me think. Just so that everyone on this group is clear, when that enforcement piece does take effect 1/1, all the chiefs of police that were involved in that committee leading up to this committee, actually, we're in agreement with the sheriff is that it'll be a 3 strikes type scenario. It's not just going to be law enforcement sees a homeless person that fell asleep outside and they walk up and handcuffs go on. It's going to be, hey man, there's a new law that went into effect. You're in violation of it. You're sleeping in the park. You can't be doing that. Would you like to go to shelter? If the answer is no, then it becomes, okay, well, you're in violation of the new law. Would you like to move on? If that answer is no, then it becomes, so you're in violation of this new law and you're trespassing because we have blanket trespass authority on any public property. You are now under arrest. So they're going to get a couple of opportunities to not go to jail before it is handcuffs and a trip to jail.
Lieutenant, is it safe to say they're probably familiar with that process already?
Yeah. So our street outreach folks, both law enforcement and the social workers that have been out there, I mean, they're talking they're talking to people that have been through this before, with different laws when they went into effect, with different ordinances when they went into effect. This is not something that some of this population is concerned about. Quite frankly, a lot of them have basically said you can take me to jail in January. Not worried.
Right, like when we're talking about the choosing versus the education population, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So,
that's
so it's still currently so I mean, right now when Safe Harbor was established back in January 2011, we're going back over over a decade now. Is that law enforcement kind of started to move into that role anyway? Hey man, you're trespassing, you're out here, you're being disorderly in this public place. Would you like to go to shelter? No. Okay, well then you're probably going to get arrested. And Pinellas County is ahead of the game on this, and when we're already trying to not put people in jail, so now we're trying harder to not put people in jail by really hitting this education period. So hopefully, when January 1 rolls around, it's not this big to do.
right. Yeah, I mean, listen, this task force is about balancing interest, right? Yeah. So we appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Do we have any county or municipal representatives that would like to provide an update from local government? I do see thank you, Arrow.
I can chime in. The big deficit we're seeing is ADA accessibility. So even though there's shelter capacity, it's not with ADA accessible units. So that may be an area where it's an extremely vulnerable population that we don't have a good solution for still. We meaning like countywide.
Thank you, Arrow. I appreciate pointing out that gap. And are you aware of any changes that the city of Largo is making or steps that the city of Largo is taking with regards to this law?
We did adopt a similar, like a consistent ordinance back, I think it was in August, about sleeping like in public right of way and so forth. And that, again, same as Lieutenant Hayes said, this is a last resort tool, but it is something if someone says, you can't make me move from, sleeping right alongside the road and things where it could be dangerous. So it's services first. If that approach doesn't work, it's time to move along. If they still refuse, that would be the time for that. But it was just a tool for additional safety. It is not, and that's the training that's going out to Largo law enforcement as well on that.
Thank you very much for sharing, Arrow. And next on the list, we
Hello.
had, go ahead, April, then Dominique.
Hi. I was just gonna kind of say the same thing that everyone's been saying. So for the city of St. Pete, we've just really been educating. We've been using these little cards here. I don't know if y'all can see it. It looks all blurry. But we've been passing these out. It's the There is Hope from HLA little cards that has, it went into effect October 1st, and we just want to educate you guys, try to get you shelters. I've also spoken with Lieutenant, and he's mentioned that, if need be, they will have their street outreach come and pick up people who would like to go to Safe Harbor as well, if our PATH team is not available during certain times. So that's our biggest thing right now, is just trying to educate and get as many people to go to shelter. Unfortunately, a lot of the feedback has been, we're not going anywhere and you will have to arrest us. And that's been rough to kind of deal with, but hopefully we just keep having the conversations and hopefully there can be some move forward to it.
And I was really echoing what April said. We're pushing out the education. I also wanted to mention that for point in time, we're actually going to be using the flyer as our main kind of distribution material for this year as well. We decided that last week. And then the street medicine is doing the same thing with education. Of course, they're only going out during the day, so they're not really seeing many encampments per se in public spaces, because it would be, as they're seeing them in the day, they could just be sitting there, for social purposes or finding a place to sit. So they're not really necessarily seeing that, but that's it.
Thank you very much. I won't put anybody on the spot, but I know that we do have a couple more municipalities on the line. If anybody else would like to come off mute and share an update. No? Okay. If you change your mind and decide you want to give an update, please feel free as we move forward. Are there any service providers who have engaged in new activities that you would like to provide an update for?
So this is John from St. Vincent de Paul. How y'all doing? Just want to add that probably about a month and a half ago, St. Pete Police started not enforcing this law, but using the existing laws that they have to start getting individuals to move along and whatnot. They've been working together with us for the people who congregate around the shelter, my staff, and along with St. Pete, we've been game planning and working on different strategies and educating. My staff has been educating them along with St. Pete. I will say that the police officers who I have witnessed engaging with the clients and all have been very professional, very empathetic. It's not this bullying or pushing them along or anything else like that. They're doing everything they can to work with them, to help them understand what's coming forth. and everything else. I will also say that the one benefit that we have had is that I have never seen Fifth Avenue and Fourth Avenue or 15th Street look so good, because the police's presence has been a lot more, and they've been, letting people know you can't just sit around, you can't camp out on the streets. Basically, like I said, I asked them, I said, are you already enforcing this? He said, no, we're just using existing laws that are on the books to help and get them prepared for what's coming forward. I have to, compliment the St. Pete Police Department with the tactic, at least that I have witnessed it, seen them doing. I have not seen one police officer be forceful with this. The only times I've seen any of them take anybody away is when the individual they've engaged with did things or acted in ways that deserved for them to be taken away. But other than that, so far so good. It's going to be a growing process. It's going to be organic. Things are going to change and whatnot, but we're going to continue to work with them as much as possible to ease this pain on everybody involved.
Thank you.
And this is April. I just also want to just piggyback off of what John said. Another thing that we're also doing over there at St. Vincent de Paul is, for a lot of the ones who come up and try to get in and can't get in because of the lottery pick, I then, as the street outreach, I kind of come around that area and get them on a list for Pinellas Hope as well. And also try to come through early morning and late evening to try to offer them other shelter spaces other than sleeping under that underpass at night or waiting around in that area to try to, get them to other shelter spaces.
That's fantastic. What great collaboration between agencies. So thank you very much for that. Love to hear examples of that. Are there other service providers, healthcare providers, veteran providers that have updates to provide? Okay. Not hearing any. Let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide then, Megan. Okay, so now we're going to talk about concerns and opportunities. I think we've done a little bit of that already. So we're just going to kind of continue that conversation. Next slide, Megan. So here, I'm going to ask the entire group to, if you haven't already, please share actions that your organization or municipality has taken or that you are aware of in response to this law. Councilmember Thanos, please go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we did pass a similar law restricting the time from 9 till 6 in the morning. But I haven't heard of any arrests or anything like that, but I'm going to have to check on it because we've been a little distracted with flooding. But I haven't heard that it's been a particular problem, and we don't have that many people as it is. So we're okay for now. But we did pass a law back at the early summer.
Thank you very much for sharing that update from the city of Gulfport. And that was from 6 p.m. to 9 a.m., did you say?
Oh, no, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m.
9 p.m. to 6 a.m. Okay. Thank you very much. So again, this is an opportunity to continue sharing. Are there specific populations or geographic areas that we have seen impacted by this law that should be addressed? Is there specific feedback from our unhoused neighbors that we have received that we as a group should be aware of so that we can address concerns and needs? Are there resource needs that you as a provider have or have seen? Are there funding opportunities that you are aware of? Are there educational or outreach opportunities? And what are the advocacy opportunities? So We have a half an hour left in our meeting here. There was a bit of an opportunity for some real action planning moving forward, but I'm going to have to condense a little bit here as we finish this meeting up. And I'm going to start by asking just generally. Oh, you know what? I'm going to pause and I'm going to let Joe, you came off mute. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Oh yeah, I was just had a thought that one of the other ramifications of this might be the hospitals. We have a lot of people that, for whatever reason, say I need to call 911, and I'd rather go to the emergency room than the alternative. So that might be a hot spot during this whole time that the hospitals might see an influx of homeless people being, maybe admitted, maybe not admitted, and then what are they going to do with them? They don't really provide transportation. They don't get them to shelters, but they might just be showing them back out the door just as quickly. So this is just a thought I had.
Thank you for sharing, Joe. And oh, go ahead, Miss Camille Henry.
Yeah, I was just going to comment. As most of you know, I do work at Northside Hospital, and Joe, that's a really good call out. We do see that. However, I do just want to say that our EMS providers and then also our law enforcement officers are usually pretty good about kind of vetting that before they come. But I can tell you that all HCA facilities do offer transport if they come and they do not have a medical necessity to be admitted. We do provide medical lifts and free bus passes. So we will provide transport to a shelter or another safe place for them if they do end up coming to our door. So, but good call out, Joe. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to know about the transport. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also had Chair Beckman had her hand up, and then there was a question from Ms. Jones. So Chair Beckman.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on that. And I think the medical discharges to the street is something that the advocacy committee is going to be looking into. It's something I need to learn more about and really want to get a handle on throughout the county because I've witnessed it myself. And so it'll be more to come in 2025 for sure.
Thank you. And I know Ms. Jones wants to talk about transportation, but April White, did you want to talk more about hospitals and medical discharges first?
No, I had something else that is along that lines, but
okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say another one of the populations that I think we should think about that might be impacted, not just the medical, but the mental health side. What I've noticed is a lot of that necessarily don't accept any services is very deep mental health and not just depression or anxiety, but schizophrenic and things like that. And I think that's going to be some of what will be impacted by the law are the ones that they can't necessarily accept the help because of where they are mentally and then end up being locked up and just that whole cycle. So just I know here in St. Pete, a lot of what I do when it's those that I can't even get close to, a lot of times I reach out to Bowley and I connect very well with Bowley in trying to get one of them to kind of come out on a daily basis with me or by themselves. But I can definitely see that population being impacted.
Thank you very, very much, Ms. White. And then Ms. Jones, I was going to read your question, but go ahead and come off mute if you'd like.
Thanks, Victoria. I just wanted to clarify my question that was in the chat. It wasn't really about transportation, but the fact that there are individuals who appear to be homeless that congregate near the Grand Central PSCA hub. And they're oftentimes along the right-of-way. Sometimes they're on the private property at the Central Plaza. But oftentimes they're on the right of way. And I'm just wondering if PSTA has still has some type of initiative. I believe it was with DFL related to those folks that tend to congregate near the bus depot. That's why I suggested that question might be directed to Ross.
And I'm here to answer that if you like. So yes, directions for living staff does still come onto Grand Central Station property to provide outreach to staff at their own direction. So that is still happening. So we're excited that they're still there.
Thanks, Ross.
Sure.
Thank you very, very, very much.
And I would also say our own street outreach goes over there as well, and our PATH team. A lot of what I will say I've noticed, just me being street outreach, a lot of it isn't necessarily homelessness. It's more of substance misuse. And so when I do, if I am, sometimes I'm just out driving around meeting my homeless like I normally do. If that's something that I do encounter, can recognize, back away, and move on if it's not that they're unhoused. And then that's a conversation that I do have with our law enforcement of how to handle that. I have noticed it's been less people over there when it comes to that, but we're still actively working with it.
Thanks, April. And I should add that they seem to have migrated across 34th Street up near CVS, as well as there's a a veterinary hospital up there that I used to get complaints from. I see that they've migrated to near 37th Street and First Avenue North. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Lieutenant Hayes?
Yeah. So is anybody from the call team involved in any of this? Because I know that they aren't homeless specific, but the mental health stuff that they come across and the low and the calls for service that they get dispatched out to, are they involved in any of this? Do they provide any of the data that we might need for as far as how many street homeless people that they're engaging on a regular basis?
Great point, Zach. I couldn't help but think about call when April mentioned Bowley. I'm just like, where's call in all of this?
Yeah, so I had to go to I had a meeting in South St. Pete the other day, and then I ran by the HLA office to pick up some books, and I noticed all the usual hot spots that that have always kind of been around. You talked about the area over by the Sunrunner, or over by Mirror Lake. All the usual spots are still populated. So I didn't know if the call team was doing anything or providing any data that this committee or any of the other committees that are doing might be helpful.
You know what, Lieutenant Hayes? I can say that I have not gotten that data. I can't speak for our HMIS team, but I do not believe that they have that data. But we'll definitely look into that, and we will get that data to use and share in future.
And Victoria, just a comment. It may take a conversation with the higher level staff at Gulf Coast, because I know in the past Gulf Coast has been hesitant about entering data into HMIS. In fact, I don't think that they do. And I know that there's conversations about the need to do so have been had with them previously, because they do receive the City of St. Pete funding not only for call, but now there's another program called the Hubs that's being funded through ARPA funds, and that also involves Gulf Coast. And like Lieutenant Hayes said, they're not solely focused on homelessness, but both the Hubs and the call programs are supposed to be interfacing with individuals who are living unhoused as well. So I think that that's why you may not have their data. It's because I could be wrong. Imani can confirm if they are whole licenses for HMIS, but in the past they did not, and they were not interested in doing it.
Yeah, maybe I don't think, yeah, just like you said, Teresa, I don't think we'll ever get them to put data into HMIS, but even if we can just get them to provide data of locations, because then you know, if somebody can finesse them to provide data, I'm sure they have sortable data of where they go so that we can try to see if there are hotspots that we don't know about that they know about where this population's congregating so that we can help try to educate them and provide them some resources additional to what the call team's already doing or in
I agree.
I have a
I agree.
question. Is hold on.
I'm not totally familiar with their service, but I know like our fire departments, there's certain things they cannot report while they're on medical calls for HIPAA. And so I didn't know if it's the same thing with the mental health calls, if there's some HIPAA restrictions for some of that. And then also thinking about the data, if we look at what Suzanne showed earlier with 700 street homeless individuals currently working with street outreach and have been VI spedated. So like, I don't know, is there any way to sort, are those people that have refused to go to shelter or are waiting to go to shelter? Because that's a huge number that we have in our system that we don't know why they're not at least in shelter.
I will tell you if it's one that April White has done, it's because they refuse to go to shelter. And every time I see them, no matter how long it's been, whether it's been a year, a month, or a day, I'm offering shelter every single time. Regardless if I've done theirs for that, I got to redo it. They're getting offered it. But a lot of times when they're out on the street for a long period of time, they don't want to go into shelter. They've been in every single shelter probably about 2 or 3 times. But I also want to just touch on the call team. It may also be good just to kind of see exactly, I guess, what they do go out to, because I'm not really sure if they go out to unhoused calls in that way. And so it'll be kind of, I guess, good to definitely get that data. I know for street outreach for City of St. Pete, it has been a little bit better to contact Bowley than the call team, as some of them, I guess, doesn't necessarily hit their criteria.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Are there any other specific geographic areas or populations that we're concerned about that we would like to discuss during this meeting today? Is there any other feedback from our unhoused neighbors that has been received that folks on this call would like to share with the group? I will say that the CoC's Lived Experience Advisory Committee has discussed this law in a number of meetings. And the Lived Experience Advisory Committee is concerned with enforcement and how this law will be enforced. There is sincere concern over the criminalization of homelessness, of course. And though, you know, we do come to these meetings and we, of course, as providers and folks who work closely with each other, know that our law enforcement partners are doing their best not to criminalize homelessness through this law. It is still a sincere concern in the community and really something that I think has to be addressed. I think that that is an opportunity for this group. And I'm speaking not as a meeting facilitator, but as a meeting participant right now. I do think that that is an opportunity for this committee because this law is not helping trust between the folks that many of the municipalities and the providers on this call are working to help and the actual municipalities and providers. So I do think that there is a sincere opportunity there to provide a little bit of education, a little bit of outreach, and to ensure we don't lose that trust. And I see we have one of our co-chairs of the Lived Experience Advisory Committee with his hand up. Gary, would you like to come off mute?
Gary, you're muted still.
Okay.
There
we
we
go.
go.
How's it? There we go. Said good afternoon, everyone. I'm hoping that during our next meeting, we can revisit that conversation. I have reached out to as many of the people that did not show up the last time and informed them that we need to have this conversation in earnest and have as many contributing members in this discussion as possible. Because as our deadline of coming up for the time of enforcement, we really need to pull together and put our heads together with this. That's basically it. I'm hoping we can add that to our agenda at our next meeting and revisit that conversation because we had so many people that were there in absentia, and I've encouraged them that they need to make sure that they're there. And I've personally told them on the phone of the next meeting date, and I would like to see them there.
Thank you very much, Gary.
Yes,
Lieutenant
ma'am.
Haish?
Yeah, Victoria, if you think it would help, I would be happy to hit up one of those meetings and just try to put that population a little bit at ease and educate them on I don't want to say 3 strikes. That sucks. But the process that law enforcement is going to go through in order to, try to let them know that it's not just we find you sleeping and you're going into cuffs and in the back of a wagon and on your way to jail.
I think that might be beneficial. Thank you very much, Lieutenant Haish. We'll connect about that.
Victoria, can you connect me with that group too, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who has heard feedback that they would like to discuss? All right. Providers, municipalities, I'm going to put you back on the spot to talk about resource needs and funding opportunities. Are there needs that your organization has? And then municipalities and funders, are there pools of funding that you are aware of that you just need applicants for, that you need direction for? Can we provide that information? So resource needs. Please, Arrow, go ahead.
So I keep doing that. Sorry.
We with hurricane recovery, our first phase we've been rolling out is eviction prevention money, pretty much, and also if someone lost their home, helping them with rent. So we're trying to help reduce the faucet from new people entering. We are already seeing people get eviction notices due to, they had lost an income for a week or two with the storm. They're on the hook for getting out. We are seeing people paying over 80% of their income for housing right now in some of these applications that have been coming through. So they're very unstable as it is. So yeah, we're trying that aspect first. We have not seen any other, aside from the FEMA assistance, there's been no other state money or HUD money released due to that, which has made everyone kind of, I know the jurisdictions have been meeting, but trying to figure out how to pivot our existing funds in some way to help with storm recovery as well. So if there is a tie over in some of that stuff, I think that would be helpful for the funders to know as we're working on our action plans. But also the St. Pete, Largo, Clearwater, and the county are also working on their 5-year action plans, right, or 5-year consolidated plans for funding. So if there's longer term focus points we need, whether it's piecemealing rapid rehousing with the funds that we have or other needs to help the overall system, those are very important for us to know at this point.
Thank you, Arrow. So just kind of to recap what you're saying there and make sure that we're all on the same page. One, the City of Largo has some prevention funding available. And if you wouldn't mind providing some information about how people can refer to that, I'm sure that folks would appreciate it. And then you also mentioned the hurricane funds, and it sounds like there might be an opportunity for the task force or for the CoC as a larger group to provide some suggestions or maybe submit a plan, a recommendation to tie some of those hurricane funds to a homeless prevention or housing folks who are currently unsheltered. And then similarly, the 5-year plan is being developed, and there is again a separate opportunity for the task force or the CoC as a larger group to submit a plan or a recommendation to tie those dollars into our mission of ending homelessness. Is that right?
That is correct. Yep. So if there's kind of bigger long-term things that the different jurisdictions need to consider, those are important for us to know.
Excellent. And Arrow, do you happen to know when the deadline might be, or when a plan should be submitted? Let's start with for those hurricane funds.
Well, and I would also add, it's unlikely these hurricanes are going to get better. So planning going forward, how do we have action plans next year and year after and 5 years and 10 years as these storms are going to get worse, right?
Yes.
To his point, I think we saw the huge vulnerability in one of our big individual shelters being in a flood zone A with the tents, Pinellas Hope. And I think
Yes.
Joe and his group have identified some potential mitigation efforts that are needed, but I think that's a huge vulnerability for our overall system. I don't know if there's any others in that kind of situation like they are.
Right. And then and to tie it back to this task force too, if we're going to end up in a situation that has a designate property, should not and cannot be in a flood zone, right?
So this sounds like a very actionable item. I do believe that there are some things from today that can be taken and turned into actions, but this opportunity that Arrow is presenting here sounds incredibly actionable and actionable fairly quickly. So I am going to ask if there is anybody on this call who would like to be part of putting together a plan to submit for how to tie some of these hurricane funds back to our mission of ending homelessness as it relates to this task force's work. All right, Judith, thank you very much. I'm going to assume that you are raising your hand because you want to be involved in that, but I'm going to let you come off mute so that I'm not just putting you on a list.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Judith.
I'll help.
I appreciate that. It looks like Mr. Ross Silvers over at PSTA has volunteered to try and help as well. Is there anybody else who would like to be involved in putting together a plan to submit? Chair Beckman, thank you. Anybody else who would like to be involved in this? We are putting together a plan to submit for how we can use hurricane funds to end homelessness as it relates to the task force. So we have Ross, we have Chair Beckman, we have Judith. Anybody else? Thank you, Gary. Oh, Eric.
I was just going to add too, so the county they just adopted their new local mitigation strategy. I did attend the last meeting for it and put a plug out there to try and get Pinellas Hope on that list for some hardening for that. But I think whatever goes, maybe that's a good avenue to submit through, is to try and get a list of projects related to this on that local mitigation strategy list, because that's where governments have to look for what was prioritized on that list to figure out where the funding's going. So it might be disaster money, or it might be disaster mitigation money that comes down at federal level.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Arrow. And thank you to everybody who has volunteered to be part of this. I do see the chair of our Providers Council here on the line. So Kevin, I'm just going to let you know that the HLA will reach out about this as well, because I'm sure that the Providers Council will want to be involved in this process. But everybody who is...
Too.
Oh, I didn't see it. Sorry,
Okay.
Kevin.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So thank you. And I'm really excited. I feel like this is a good actionable item. So thank you all for volunteering. Judith?
Dawn wants to help too.
That's another hand I didn't see. Excellent.
I told him.
Thank you. This is wonderful. And I feel like we can maybe use this hurricane planning, um, recommendation planning as a step one for the 5-year plan planning as well. So thank you all for participating in that. Are there any other funding opportunities or resource opportunities that folks are aware of?
Well, there's the resilience fund too, right?
There is the resiliency fund, and I will pull up the link for that and I will put it in the chat. And then Chair Beckman, it looks like you have your hand up as well.
I did. I put in the chat the community foundation of Tampa Bay, as well as the Pinellas Community Foundation. So either one of those we might investigate. I know that I had conversations with the community foundation of Tampa Bay about enhancing the salary for our HLA CEO. And I know they also are have rapid response grants related to hurricane impact, serving clients as well as staff that is, provider staff that's engaged in that work. That was a big discussion about whether or not funds could be used for that, as in, our providers are all like first line, first responders ish. They really are. And how could those funds be used that way? So lots of possibilities there. That's at least with the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay.
Thank you very much, Chair Beckman. And the link for the for the Pinellas Community Foundation Tampa Bay Resiliency Fund is in the chat there for everybody in case you haven't seen that one yet. Thank you all very much. Any other resource funding outreach opportunities anybody is aware of? Advocacy opportunities? Okay. All right. Is there anything else that anybody on this call would like to discuss for the good of our community or the group?
Victoria, just curious. So this is a task force that is then making recommendations to some group. Is that what the ultimate end game is for this task force, or is it like an ongoing committee? Just wondering who we're.
That is a great question, Arrow. So this task force, and Chair Beckman, please feel free to chime in here. But this task force was created to really address this anti-camping law and how our community would respond to it in the immediate. So this, in that case, wouldn't be ongoing until the end of time, like one of the CoC's standing committees, but would continue meeting until we feel as though the work has either wrapped up or can be wrapped into the work that some of the other CoC groups are doing.
I think that's correct. And I think, we'll really know. We've done a good job in talking about anticipating and getting the law enforcement has gone out and kind of done surveys of where people congregate and how many, and the groups of 6 and all that business. We did some work this summer on possibilities of expanding shelter availability and all that, but we really don't know what's coming or what may come, whatever, how it's going to develop through 2025 until, January 1st, and whatever kind of enforcement and warning system and all that business, how that all plays out, how many people come down, seasonally, and all that's to be seen. But it's better to have conversations ahead of time and think about some different options. But until you're, hit with it, the reality isn't there yet.
Right. And then more specifically, this task force is to inform the CoC, which then has different stakeholders, and the CoC then acts through the HLA. So this task force makes recommendations to the CoC, I guess, is the very specific answer to the question, if that also helps.
Thank you both. And then Lieutenant Haish?
Just one last reminder, building shelter beds and opening more shelter beds will not move this needle. The way to move this needle and keep people out of jail and off the street is to get them into housing. So we can open up 1,000 more shelter beds if there are considered to be hundreds of people on the street. We are not going to move that needle. They are still going to be on the street. We've got to use whatever influence on whatever committee, governing body, jurisdictional listener that we can in order to have more rapid rehousing, more permanent supportive housing beds available to this community. Otherwise, nothing will change, and we're going to sit in these committees for the rest of our career.
Can we film something together, or you got a tally with me and you and I say that together? I would love that.
My
Well,
public relations process is pretty extensive.
That makes
Don't
even
hold
more
your
sense.
breath.
I just love what you just said so much. I just love it so much.
Absolutely. And we have this advocacy committee, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I've only been part of this for a little over 4 years, but that's been the mantra, is that we don't have an exit ramp. And if people don't march up to Tallahassee, that's where the money comes from, and really make noise and lay out the facts. I agree with Zach, but people have to put their necks out. It can't, you got to do it.
Well, it's housing. It's always been, it's housing.
And so we need to be a force that people will listen to. And we've got to, again, I don't want to preach to the choir. We've got to get business owners and people with money to say the same thing. It can't just be us, I don't know, whatever. But that's part of the advocacy committee. Please join the advocacy committee and let's move that needle.
Thank you all. We've had some really great discussions, some really great feedback today. And I do feel, to use Chair Beckman's words, as though we have had some discussions today that will move the needle forward. So thank you for being here, for being engaged, and for being a part of this really important work. Do either of our chairs or our vice chair have anything that you would like to add as we close this meeting out?
Thank you all for everything you do.
Yes, I will second that. Thank you all. Chair Beckman says thank you. She appreciates your time and expertise. And we will send out a recording of this and the notes once they are available. And thank you all very much for participating. I hope you have a wonderful week and happy holidays.
Thanks.
Thank you.